As I mentioned, Angus Taylor is now the leader of the Liberal Party, thus the coalition, thus the opposition. His first task upon taking the job, and if you were watching our live coverage on Friday, I thank you, was an anticipation about what he was going to say that would be any different than what was being said the week before, the month before, or even, let's be honest, a couple of years before, because all of that had been rejected and rejected multiple times by the Australian people. The challenge is multi-fronted, and any multi-front war is always a difficult one to fight because, of course, you have the government in its strongest electoral position that it has been in a generation, and certainly the highest at the moment. You know, the flank of One Nation, and then again you throw in the Tiffany Teals and a whole bunch of other things. It is an unenviable position to be in, but signs of life, perhaps. An opinion poll has just been released by the 9 newspapers, The Age, the Sydney Morning Herald and the Brisbane Times, and it shows a ever so slight tick up for the Liberal and National Party. One Nation still remaining above, is actually now going from above to now dead heating them. Now, as you can see, Labor, basically where it was at the last election. I think they might be 1 point under, but still. The Liberal National Party way under. Remember, the Greens have basically floated around that 11. So the variable is always One Nation, and they are a little down from the last poll, which was 2 weeks ago. The Libs are a little up in the last poll. Now, let's have a look how this is in terms of under the last poll under Susan Lee versus the first poll under Angus Taylor. Now, One Nation, as you can see there, was going from 25 to 25, but you are seeing here a little uptick for the coalition there with 3 points. Where does it come from? Well, as you can see, it is one off the independents. It is theoretically one off the Greens and one off Labor. So all of that is rounding errors. This poll, of course, had to be completed by today, so did cover a little before, but essentially the changeover time of Friday and Saturday. Now, to give you an idea of just how strong One Nation's position is, and it is not a regional Queensland phenomenon that is somehow flipping the books. Let's have a look state by state. Now, remember, you need about 14% to be able to get a Senate seat. That would clearly mean another senator would be going in from New South Wales, as they currently sit at 24%. The Liberals down to 21, Labor at 32. In Queensland, now, interestingly, there is support for One Nation in New South Wales is 1 point higher than it is in Queensland. But in Queensland, the LNP is in front of One Nation. The margin, though, to Labor is a little bit tighter. So it's not quite a third, but you can see it's a full quarter, under a quarter, and a little bit over a quarter. That's in Queensland. Remember, 14% is the mark to be guaranteed a spot in the Senate. At 23%, you obviously get one person up, and at the next election, that will be Pauline Hanson. But then it's a question about preferences, about whether the remaining 9% goes over to the LNP or the remaining 9% from them goes over to One Nation. Interestingly, too, in Victoria, I apologise, that's where we are now. In Victoria, it's a higher number for One Nation than the LNP, and it is actually the highest supporting state in the country for One Nation is Victoria right now, where the margin between the government and One Nation is just 4 points. It is larger than that in New South Wales, larger than that nationally. So fascinating to watch. As for the rest of Australia, and this is not an offence to anyone living outside of the 3 states that I've mentioned thus far, statistically, it's a little bit of a sample from South Australia, Western Australia and Tasmania. Yes, there's smatterings in from the territories, but the outside and rest of Australia number. Now, part of the structural problem for the Liberal Party was that the rest of the Australian number used to be really good. The Western Australian proportion particularly was helped to make that a lot closer than, 12 points. Now, that is very significant when you have a look at the differences between, the 11 points, I should say, between the Liberal and National Party and the ALP. But again, One Nation in the rest of the country would be over 14%, and of course that would produce senators from Western Australia, where they've already produced one at the last election, South Australia, where, of course, Corey Bernardi's the leader right now, and fingers crossed in Tasmania, where our mate Lee Hanson will be joining us from later tonight. Now, as part of the future debate about whether Labor can continue to not have a majority of votes, but to have a majority of preferences go back their way, which provides them with a supermajority in the parliament. It's all about their ability to have the best story, or the one that people believe, on the key issues. The challenge for the Liberal Party is to come up with not definitions of the problem, but what are their solutions to the issues. We certainly know that One Nation has got clear answers to many of these questions, and they don't have to do such work because many of those positions have been the same for a very long time. Almost all of them are an echo of what worked for the party that took them up to doubling their parliamentary representation at the last election. Again, same poll from the Resolve poll that's going to be turning up in the Sydney Morning Herald, The Age and the Brisbane Times. So, top issues for people: keeping cost of living low, managing the finances. That's, of course, a reference to the broader government finances. Then it's health and aged care. Now, I think you could split healthcare and aged care, and let's see how they sit. But you know, I've talked a lot about how Gen X, one of the things that is affecting them is because they're starting to get line of sight to their parents and potentially their own lives in and around aged care, how that'll be paid for. There seems to be a double up between 2 and 4, but still, this is how they've categorised it: economic management and recovery. And again, back to point number 1, jobs and wages. That's your top 5 of the issues for Australian politics and Australian voters right now. Then 6 through 10, housing and rental prices are at 6. Crime and antisocial behaviour, this is a lot higher than any national political discussion often goes, but in places like Melbourne, in places like regional Queensland, or at least on the fringes of Brisbane, that's a massive issue. Education. Now, again, is this about getting easier access to university, or is this, as I believe it to be, people who think the current system is not good enough, and despite the hundreds of billions of dollars, the results keep going backwards? Then national security, and then managing natural disasters. Now, based off other polling, the only one of those 10 issues in which the Liberal Party is in front of anyone else is the 9th most important issue in the country, that being national security and defence. And again, it is very easy for people in and around the Liberal Party, and to a lesser extent One Nation. But of course, One Nation at this moment is not considered to be the party of government. They're playing, of course, to be opposition between now and the next election. What is the Liberal Party answer to cost of living? Now, is it going to be a repeat, largely, of what had been said before about a reduction in things like petrol taxes? Is it going to be bold ideas like instant asset write-off? Is it going to be major changes to the tax system that mean the current largest source of revenue to the government is the average working man or woman, and then by some margin is company tax, and then by some margin under $100 billion compared to almost $300 billion is the GST? I don't know. But again, this is where some of the meat needs to get on the bone. Now, obviously, any meat that's put on the bone by an opposition gets pulled apart by a government. But there has to be actual answers to many, if not all, of those before you start to get in the game. Because, yes, they have to break up with the government first. Remember, governments lose elections rather than oppositions win them necessarily. But also, for you to become a viable or attractive option is for not just this is a problem, but what is the potential solution? Which is why it is very important to note about the issues in this one poll and how they are ranked, and how often those of us on the centre-right of Australian politics talk about them versus, and you know, the cost of living's been what I've been thumping about for years in a row, but still, we talk a lot about energy. We talk a lot about renewable power. We talk a lot about nuclear, 12th most important issue to people. Immigration and refugees. Now, the same polls will tell us 50% of people think that too many people are coming in. 14th most important information. And again, for the Tiffany Teals or the Radical Greens, the environment and climate change sits below, among other things, the education system, crime, housing, healthcare and aged care. All of that matters, which is why I want to take some time talking about how the first pitch was made by the new leadership of the Liberal Party. Now, again, when we were sitting there on Friday morning, starting to move past whether he would become the Liberal leader, the questions were about what would be the first face that Angus Taylor would put on the Liberal Party. Jane Hume, of course, elected as his deputy. Well, very interestingly, there are a couple of moments outside of the big set-piece moments when people do pay attention. Now, there is a huge number of Australians who simply don't know Angus Taylor, so this was about a first introduction. Most people weren't watching television or listening to the radio at midday on a Friday, so how this was interpreted at the 6 p.m. news mattered. But because you may well have been living a busy life on Friday, I wanted to show you the first things that were said by Angus Taylor as the leader. What is he trying to do in terms of how he's introducing himself, what issues he's prioritising, and then marry that against what I just showed you about people and their feelings right now, not just about which political party is the best to handle something, but which issue is most important to them. This is the first, which was about his time that begins now as the leader of the Liberal Party and thus opposition.
We're in this position because we didn't stay true to our core values, because we stopped listening to Australians, because we were attracted to the politics of convenience rather than focusing on the politics of conviction. This ends today. This ends today. There is much work to be done to win back supporters and everyday Australians. But just as Australians have put faith in us before, I'm confident we can restore their faith in us again. It's on us to regain that trust and earn it, but the choice is simple for the Liberal Party: change or die.
Now, as you know, with politicians, they know the moments that they want to drive home, particularly for that 6 p.m. news. And as I was discussing and back and forthing with everyone on Friday morning here on air, I put a lot of emphasis on the 6 p.m. news, not because it is the single greatest source of news, but because, for obvious reasons, it is a well-established one that still more than 1 million people engage with each and every night. Still the collective #1 television show on free-to-air is the news. Once you put it together between 7 and 9 and you throw in the ABC, the collective news bulletin is #1 by a country mile. Maths might be fun to talk about, but it is the news that people pay attention to, which is why I am always trying to show you how the news sausage is made. Could come up with a better term, but still, you get the point, about how the media ask the questions, about how the media frame the reports, because it's not just about changing minds in one night, it's about changing them week after week after week, or reinforcing something. So, again, to that central issue of cost of living, and the central issue that has seen people move from the Liberal Party to One Nation, cost of living and borders. Here's how Angus Taylor delivered the message.
So many Australians can't afford to buy a home. Australians who are working 2 jobs are juggling whether they can feed their families or pay their electricity bills. Record immigration has added pressures to infrastructure, to services, to housing in this country. Our borders have been open to people who hate our way of life. People who don't want to embrace Australia and who want Australia to change for them.
Important stuff. A lot of people would like to hear such clarity from an opposition. Interestingly, though, in terms of the A1 issue, it remains cost of living. Now, does that mean that as politics has been turned by the Labor Party, it's about who can give me the handout? Or is it about looking at how to ensure that everything government has a finger in, it's as low as possible? That things like the little ratchets up that happen when it comes to excise taxes are things that are thought of, or big and bold ideas like ones that One Nation have taken to an election. And again, once people start to read, I think people get quite turned on to, which is the idea that if you're a family, well, you would be able to take the highest income and average it out with the lowest income of your partner, your husband, your wife. That would be an interesting way of doing things, where it might mean many couples go from the highest possible tax rate to a little bit lower, or the most populous tax rate, which is in and around 40 cents, and maybe being able to push that down. It'd be fascinating to see. And again, to that conversation in and around home ownership and immigration. Now, you've just heard there about, again, the values being offered by Angus Taylor. Well, again, it is unsurprising to be floating around the issue of immigration.
So let me be clear about my resolve as leader and what the Liberal Party will stand for under my leadership. All Australians, especially young Australians, deserve the stability and the opportunity to own a home. We'll re-establish home ownership as the centrepiece of the Australian dream. We'll stand for an immigration policy that puts the interests of Australians first and puts Australian values at the centre of that policy. If someone doesn't subscribe to our core beliefs, the door must be shut. As Liberals, we stand for lower inflation, lower interest rates and lower taxes. Taxes on homes, taxes on superannuation, taxes on our children's future. Australia needs an energy policy that is based on common sense, not Labor's net zero ideology. We will get rid of Labor's bad carbon taxes on the family vehicle, on manufacturing and food in this country, and of course on electricity. We'll reduce financial pressures for families, expand childcare choice and give children the best start in life, not force every family into a universal system.
So, again, I wanted you to see things in their proper context. Obviously, it's a big day, a nervous moment for anyone. So, yeah, there's the checking of the notes. Some people mark that up, some people mark that down. But I think it was a reasonable start, OK? Now, again, politics is not going to change in a day. And while a week might be a long time in politics, it's going to be a lot longer than that to see exactly how the Liberal Party reintroduces itself, who it reconnects with. But, of course, remember, at the end of the day, while, yes, there is this significant number of people, the majority of which used to be Liberal voters that have gone off to One Nation, they have to take votes off the Labor Party. In part, that means you have to point out their problems. You have to also come up with better solutions. So some people who may well have written you off for any series of other reasons look at you because you have a potential answer to the big issues they care about.